If you could name one show, only one, that you consider the perfect adaptation of its source material, what would it be? For me, this is a pretty hard question to answer, but for the My Anime List community, there is a new top dog in town. Frieren, Beyond Journey's End. It's certainly been a while since I've seen a story as beautiful as this. Us fantasy anime fans have been eating good the past few months, but the release of this show was a ray of hope for all fantasy fans who actually had a few brain cells left. We had been on our knees, praying that something would come out that was good. And thus, our prayers were answered. I gotta admit, I was a little skeptical of Frieren at first. I wasn't even planning to watch it, but I gave it a shot anyway, and I am glad I did. Because, wow, just wow is all I can really say about it. This show is something that went hard from the first episode. The concept of this show taking place after the main story is done is something that really intrigued me. And I think even just that point, looking past the story, is what brought a lot of people in. We've had enough Demon King fights anyway. Frieren is like a breath of fresh air, if you will. If anything, a lot of the episodes are quite calming in a way. It's like I'm watching a slice of life, but then one moment there's explosions everywhere. But my point is, it feels like it has balance. A lot of the show, even during some of its action sequences, doesn't feel as loud or overdramatic as a lot of shows feel like nowadays. Especially shonen titles. I'm not saying I don't love that stuff, I absolutely adore it, but sometimes it's nice to have a break. Plus, we all love elves, do we not? So, one thing about elves is traditionally in fantasy, elves live for a very, very long time. And as expected, Frieren is very, very old. Like, I'm saying she's thousands of years old. And because of her lifespan, that means that any human that she becomes close with eventually dies in not even a fraction of her lifetime. So she appears apathetic and closed off socially. She's got a soft side, but who could blame her for not wanting to actually get close to people? It would just be constant heartbreak again and again. She doesn't really understand how to value her time correctly, she just lives it day by day. And that begs the question, what would you do if you even lived that long? How would you spend your time? How would you interact with people? At the start, we watch glimpses of how the world drastically changes as Frieren continues to wander it. But after she meets the party of heroes, she eventually learns the value of time in a sense. As she realizes what her friends were trying to teach her, time already got the better of them. It's about how Frieren perceives it and how she learns to value it properly. And through that journey is what makes this series so wonderful. Despite it being new, everything feels familiar, almost nostalgic in it. Frieren is able to take such a bare-bones fantasy setting and fill it with life. Every single town they go to, every single person they meet, it all feels real. And I feel like that's something a lot of fantasy animes fail to do. They fail to make the worlds feel believable. And not believable as in could this happen, because it's fantasy, it's in the name, but having characters that feel like real people. And naturally, with this, the relationships in the show build very well. Stark and Fern are a prime example of well-done character interaction. No interaction between these two feels forced or strictly for plot development. It's kind of like they sat there and recorded two actual teenagers communicating through relationship problems. This show still does follow some of the standard fantasy anime tropes with the characters and the world they're in. I mean, a lot of it is something you've probably seen before. But, you know, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that tropes are bad because they're not. It obviously depends on how they're done and how they're presented. Not every single copy and paste character is a bad character. We've seen numerous animes that have main characters in these worlds that do work. Tropes ultimately exist for a reason, and you're supposed to build characters off of them, but it's the way you do it that counts. The reason I love characters like Stark so much is although they fall into this cowardice trope, they usually would annoy me in most other shows. They manage to keep it consistent but not intrusive. It is a big part of his character and a problem that he has to overcome, but it doesn't come off as annoying or obnoxious like some other characters I know.
Please, I'm asking you again, Mary!
It exists purely to strengthen his character. Although Frieren isn't entirely action-focused, when there is action, it is absolutely fantastic. And once the show hits the exam arc, oh boy does it get good. I mean, we got key animators on this fight like Hikata Nakamura, who just absolutely blew my mind with Stark vs. Dragon. But then again, animation from this studio has never failed to impress me. And yes, you did hear me right, I know I said exam arc, I can see you guys rolling your eyes. But trust me when I say this was not boring at all. I'm not gonna lie, the cast that we're introduced to is surprisingly diverse with people like Weerbell and, you know, my favorite Ubel, who I like for no specific reason.
Should have eyes on the Graf City before much longer. The road to oysters hasn't been an easy one. Guess I'll take a little break.
And this arc does carry a lot of importance because we learn a lot more about Frieren as a character too. We learn about her backstory and the people that she grew up with. I mean, if you consider it growing up. They let us see firsthand how her worldview was constructed, but not in a forceful manner. The real question is, who is the man behind all this cooking? Keiichiro Sato is the director for Frieren Beyond Journey's End, and a well-known director in the anime community. I'm sure you've heard of him before. He's done bangers like Bocchi the Rock. It's obvious that the staff who worked on this truly had a passion for the story they were adapting, and they wanted to make it the best they could possibly muster. And I think they did. It's almost a miracle that so many famous animators and directors worked on this show. Even Evan Cole composed the soundtrack and did a fantastic job with it, but I expected nothing less from the composer of Violet Evergarden. 2024 has given us many wonderful shows, but for me, Frieren was the one that stood out the most. I don't think anything has been able to compare to how much I cried like a bitch on the first episode. There have been many good first episodes this year, but this one just took the cake. I think if any anime, overall, I would say Frieren is my top anime of 2024.